Hopefully it was a great night. It started to get cool around here, so it's kind of the exciting season around here. Today we're going to talk about some interesting things. So we're going to talk about identity. So as we get into this as a discussion, I was kind of curious what drew each of you to this course. What was the thing about this that made you decide to pony up the cash and the effort to show up here every day? Lucas, what was it for you?
Yeah, I guess I can start. So the main thing that drew me to this course is it's first off that it promotes critical thinking, and then also, the entire point of it is looking at all these different disciplines of thought and trying to find like common themes, but also kind of like comparing them and just kind of relating everything together. And so I think that that offers great skills, but I also think that it messages to future employers that I may have that like I'm a person that is a critical thinker and that has a formal education in critical thinking.
Okay, all right, Michael. What about you?
Maybe a little less noble.
Okay, hey, no, I mean, divine self-interest is a great thing too here.
I just learned from my advisor that I had a lot of the requirements filled for the program, and I haven't taken a class like this, so I was like, I'll try and see where it goes, where it takes me. If I can finish the program, it'd be cool, but it's a good class, so.
Okay. No, that's I have an associate's degree in applied aviation maintenance management for the exact same reason. As I was going through, I realized I have enough credits to actually do this. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and apply for that and get that at the same time. All right, Kaylee, what about you?
I'm an English writer with a major in anthropology.
Okay.
So I was interested in reading texts that a lot of my readings were built off of, I guess, like getting the main foundation and like building up to that, I guess.
Okay. What's the corollary between English and anthropology for you?
Well. I like looking at the theories of anthropology and applying them to like the humanistic side of English, I guess.
Okay. So it's kind of looking at like what was going on in the world when these people were writing the things that they were writing?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Elise, what about you?
Well, it fit into my schedule, which is always great.
Hey, yeah. Very pragmatic.
Whenever I read all the stuff that we were going to talk about, it kind of incorporated a lot of the subjects that I might not have, like incorporated physics and incorporated, some other English topics that I wouldn't get to have in my schedule otherwise.
Okay. Emma, what was it for you?
So I actually graduated in May of 2016 with an English degree and business minor. But I work in the dean's office downstairs, and fun fact, if you guys want jobs, get a job at East State and have employee benefits, so this class would cost me like $140. But I also was one class away from getting this certificate, so I was like, what the hell?
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Nathan, what about you?
I'm taking it for so many terrible reasons. I mean, it's partly the idea of I already have a lot of classes where I work with primary sources anyways. So it's along the same lines of if I take this class, it's just an easy way to get another kind of addition.
Okay.
Since I've taken a lot of the other requirements anyways. But also building my schedule, I wanted one more class and this fit perfectly into the open slot. So it's kind of, why not? And I really enjoyed it, so worked out.
Okay. All right, Jack, what about you?
Well, I've taken a class with Professor Johnson and I enjoyed her teaching style. I also like the idea of using primary texts in classrooms. I'm going to be a teacher and I think it's pretty relevant. I don't like the way things are with a lot of society's problems and the current systems that exist. And I want to know why they are the way that they are and what I can do to change them.
Okay. That's very noble of you, Both teaching social studies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. See? Teaching and trying to be an activist at the same time. It's pretty cool. All right, Jessica, we're gonna pop over. See this? We're gonna keep it fresh. What about you?
So I'm a philosophy major, and I had a lot of the requirements to get the certificate anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing this since it's my last semester on K-State. I had to get this class to do that. But for other reasons that I like primary text are like most of my education has been reading primary texts, and so but mainly within philosophy and political theory. So I wanted to get like an experience of things in physics and theater and history that I haven't experienced before.
Okay. Mallory, what about you?
Yeah, I'm graduating as well, so this is the last class I have before I complete the certificate. But I thought it was cool that we get to learn from a lot of different teachers. Because, I mean, it's great having the same teacher throughout a semester because you get to know, like, how they teach, but this kind of keeps us on our toes, so we have to think differently for each section.
Right.
And we get exposed to, like, different things that we wouldn't in our majors, so, like, physics or theater or, I mean, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I read for my major, but it's really cool to get to experience other teaching styles, and it really mixes it up.
Okay. So today is all about identity, right? As we're going through and reading about this, we're trying to see America not through the eyes of an American, but through the eyes of a foreigner. And it's kind of hard, right? At this point in time, you're trying to think of America is a very large British settlement. So how does a British settlement, a huge expanse of British colonies, any different from Britain? Right? If you're sitting in Britain and you're like, it's a British colony, it's going to be exactly like here. But the two are very, very different from one another, right? So we can say again, it's been said many times in many ways, that we're two nations separated by a common language, right? So we are each using English to describe the things that are around us, but we're using that language differently. The language that Locke was using to describe a society was built around knowledge of nobility and of honor and of pretty tight social standards. However, the language that Corsair is using today is very different, even though they're not that far apart in the time periods that they're written. So, a little background on him, to use Kylie's appreciation of anthropology and history together. Corsair was born 1735. He was born in France, in a little town outside of Paris, which, right, like that's where everywhere is from. It's not right there.
Question, how do you spell that?
What's that?
Corset?
Corsair? Yeah. Look, we're gonna get to a point here where we're gonna translate his French name into his English name that he takes on. Much easier to spell,
okay.
Right? Okay. So his parents were actually minor French nobility, which got him hooked up with a military academy to be a topographer. So he's in school. He gets picked up, and dropped off in Canada as a surveyor, and while he's in Canada in 1754, the French Indian War kicks off, and he's actually there present as the British forces stormed the castle there on the Fields of Abraham outside of Montreal. Okay, so it's one of the larger battles in the French Indian War. There's 7 Years' War, World War Zero, whatever you want to refer to it as. He is so fed up with war and with violence, and that he has a moment of existential crisis, and he, without much ado, departs the French army, walks across the great expanse, and comes into New York and applies for English citizenship. He's done fighting. He doesn't want to do any of this anymore. He just wants to settle down and be left alone. He wants to become a farmer. So he, in 1759, he immigrated to New York, and he became John Hector St. John. Can you spell that one all right, Mama? There. Yeah. All right. He decided he was going to ditch everything about his whole French past. He tried very, very hard to ditch everything, even in his linguistic patterns. As he learned English, that he tried to affect an American accent to everything he said or did, which is kind of funny, because if you think about it, he's probably playing a caricature of what he perceives an American says or does, not so much what one actually is, right? So he's playing a character of himself, which is kind of an interesting little thing here. From 1760 to 1770, he lives a fairly routine life as a farmer in the upstate New York. He's got a fairly small holding, about 300 acres, I think is what he says there. And he's happy. He gets married. He starts having kids. The world's starting to look right. Then in 1770, the Boston Massacre occurs. Again, he's got an existential crisis under his hands. He knows that he doesn't want to fight in an army ever again, but he now sees that the British are turning upon the British. And in an environment like that, somewhere along the line, you're going to have to decide which side you're on. Even if deciding that you're not on either one of the two sides is the side, right? Not to tear too far away from the prophet Geddy Lee there, but if you choose not to make a choice, you still have made a choice. He's watching from afar on his farm, and he's seeing the British Army march up and down the coast as they burn Boston, and then they move to New York, and he starts to get a little cold feet about what's going on. About the same time, he gets word from France that his father is dying. Mind, it probably took 3 or 4 months for the message to come from France to America that his father was dying, and he had that pain of regret that he had not been back to see his father in 25 years, which at that point in time is the better part of a lifetime. So he takes his eldest son and he leaves his wife and kids in the States. He crosses the British lines, all ninja style, into New York, where he's arrested and held for 3.5 months as a spy. After they finally get down to the root of it and figure out he's not a spy, he's just a dumb farmer that happened to ninja across our lines here, he's put on a boat and he starts sailing from New York to London. Off the coast of Ireland, his boat sinks. His son drowns, and he is again taken prisoner, this time as a potential French spy. So he's now sitting in prison, and where he decides, I don't have a whole lot to do with myself or my time, let me write a book. And that's what we're reading here, is these letters from an American farmer, as he's deciding to try and figure out how to say who and what America is and introduce that subject to a European audience. So he's writing this volume as if he's writing letters to a friend. So they're very personal, they're very poignant, they're very informal. And as he's going about this, he's in prison for almost 8 months. When he finally is released from prison, he finds a publisher in London that releases this book. It becomes a smash hit. He does end up ultimately making it to France, to his father's bedside, before he passes. As he's there, in 1782, little to his knowledge, his wife and his sons, his children in the States, are all killed in an Indian massacre. This is like a melodrama, right? As he's sitting in France, a little thing called the French Revolution kicks off, and because he's the son of minor nobility, he is now seen as an enemy of the state. Right? In sheer panic, he runs to the American embassy, where he meets a guy by the name of James Madison, who saves him manages to convince the French that he's not a threat, and puts him on an American shipping vessel from Paris back to New York. He stays in New York till 1810, where he decides that he doesn't really know where his allegiances lie, and so he decides that as long as he's going to be a person who doesn't have a country, he's going to go back to where he was born. And so he leaves New York in 1810, and he dies on his parents' land in France in 1813 under house arrest. So he was a man who lived a fairly dramatic life, but tried to introduce the world to his world. So we're going to try a little exercise here today, a little seeing how interesting you guys can get here. So what I want you to do, there's a blank piece of paper with you, and hopefully you all have some sort of pen, pencil, marker, other implement of destruction writing around beside you there. What I want you to do is think of a very simple task. In your head, to yourself, think of a very simple task. Now, what you're going to do is draw directions without words on that sheet of paper for how to perform that task. You have 2 minutes to do that. And then we're going to pass your paper around, and we're going to see if we can figure out what task we're supposed to be performing. Okay?
You say draw or
Draw, diagram, whatever.
so no word.
No words. No
Oh,
words.
okay.
You're
I was
gonna
like,
you're gonna convey to somebody how to do this task with no words.
Can we use numbers for like steps or?
Sure. All right. Should be interesting. So you've got 2 minutes. Go ahead and begin. About a minute remaining. Okay, go ahead and stop. All right. Now, each of you get up, go across the room to somebody who's not traditionally sitting around, present them your drawing, and see if they can depict from your instructions on what this is, and if they can perform it.
I think you're really. Could I just swap?
Anyone have time to swap?
Okay, who's ready to make a stab at what
Let me.
what we've got here? All right, go ahead. Who's got?
Do we answer or what?
Yeah, go ahead and answer. Is that making a Keurig coffee?
Getting a glass of water. I can't draw a kitchen sink.
Okay. All right. All right. Anybody else got? What you got? Yours is making coffee. Is it?
That's a really good.
Is it making Keurig coffee?
I don't think so.
Okay. So it's a very specific type of coffee we're making here, like a drip coffee or something.
I mean, there's like candle. I don't know. Yeah. Candle
Okay.
coffee.
Okay, candle coffee. All right. Jack, what do you got down there?
I believe I have instructions for acquiring a pencil and paper.
Oh, it's supposed to be writing.
Okay.
Not get that one.
All right. Kaylee, what do you have there?
How to make a pot of coffee. Very original.
Okay. What kind of coffee is it?
Coffee.
Drip coffee? Okay. All right, Nathan, what do you have there?
I don't know. It looks like an apple, but I can't think of what it would be for an apple. So I'm thinking it may be something to do with a pumpkin. It's an apple or a pumpkin. I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Whose drawing was this? Okay, what is it?
Eating an apple.
Eating an apple. All right, Michael, what do you have?
I have a an empty bottle, it looks like, then a sad guy with the empty bottle, and then it looks like there's this really weird stream of water that's just entering the bottle from afar.
Uh-huh.
And it's not like underneath, so it's sort of making me mad, but this guy's happy now, so he's got
Okay.
a full bottle of something.
Okay.
So,
That's just filling up a water bottle.
Fill up water bottle. Okay.
why is
We
the
all need
stream
some
going
music.
like this? Explain. Why is it not? I don't know.
Out.
Okay. All right, Lucas, what do you have there?
Yeah, it's really confusing, I feel. I
Yeah.
think this is probably the most confusing. But it looks like, once again, water is a common theme near water. So we're using that, though, to water a field, it looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Water garden. we'll
Okay.
take it.
No. All right, but you see how everybody has although these were all simple tasks, right? They're all viewed from a very, very personal perspective. Coffee was a great example in there. Candle coffee, Keurig coffee, all these different things.
Sorry, I didn't know what this was.
Okay. It's interesting how our personal perspectives on things kind of change the way that we present those things to someone else, right? And then our own personal biases, when we look at these things, change them again, even though in our own minds they were very, very clear. So, how do you describe something that doesn't have a word? How do you describe a people that don't have a land? How do you do that? Think about it in your own self-interest. Lucas, if you had to describe yourself in one word, what's the first word that comes to mind?
Oh, gosh. One word, I don't even know. Like, honestly, I would just say young.
Young, okay. Michael, what about you?
Committed.
Committed. Kaylee?
Bubbly,
Bubbly. Lise?
alive.
Alive. Emma?
Sleepy.
Sleepy. Nathan?
It wouldn't make sense to anyone here.
No, that's fine. Just go ahead.
It's not an adjective, I would say hippogriff.
Hippogriff, okay.
No.
All right.
Yep. What do you mean?
Jack, what about yourself?
Worried.
Worried. Mallory.
Human?
Human. Jessica.
Flustered.
Flustered. Dr. Johnson, what about you? Woman. Okay. This is interesting, right? All the things that the table brought up, we're all describing them as an individual. Yet the word you brought up described you as a classification within a broader group, right? If we remove those words from our language, right? If we remove the thought of a national identity, of gender, we start to see that we have to come up with these things in a new way. And that's what Corbusier has tried to do for us here. He's tried to invent America to people that, although we're speaking the same language, we're definitely not seeing the same things. And he's trying to show why America is fully different than England as it sits. Okay? Corbusier, by the way, if you're for any of those are agronomy majors or friends, is a type of chicken that's grown up in France. It's known for its unusually large size eggs. So there you go. Okay. So what kind of themes? Let's talk about first letter number 2 on the situation, feelings, pleasures of an American farmer. What kind of thematic material did you see in letter 2?
Well, now it's kind of depressing because you told me what happened to his family. He talks a lot about his kids and his wife.
Remember, at the point he's writing this, he knows that his eldest son has died, but in his own mind,
He knows the son has died, but not the family.
right?
The
They're all happy and good. So family's a big thing in his world, and it's interesting to see how happy family makes him. Okay, what else did you see in relation to that family?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, what else did you see?
The way that he, I mean, you kind of mentioned this too, the way that he talks, it's like he's talking to his friends or like a close I mean, it's like he's talking to his family about his family. But if he's trying to describe America, it's kind of funny that it's more about like his individual feelings rather than them as a country or
Right.
whatever they were like at that point, whatever they classified as.
Okay. What you have, Jack?
People see it like, from the way he describes, people are bonded by sort of this like common identity,
Right.
even though they come from different, I guess, backgrounds and places.
Right. So, coming from those different places, they make a new society?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see, initially, he starts talking about himself as a very young man, right? And how he may have wanted to give up this farm and go take on some wild roving. But then as soon as he found a wife, and then as they had kids, he found himself more and more excited to just be in the place that he was. And his little farm kind of became a microcosm of his own domain. He talks about, as an American farmer, he possessed freedom of action, freedom of thoughts, ruled by a mode of government which required but little from him. In the hinterland, it's probably fair and true in any real society, even under a modern context, that in the hinterlands, the rule of government is probably pretty sparse. Probably pretty much left to your own devices for the most part there. Do you see any corollaries between where he has placed family and where Locke has placed the idea, the construct of a family, a social setting from last time?
I mean, his father like passed down, right? Isn't that what it says? Like passed down the farm, and that's kind of what they were talking about. Like Locke was talking about passing down and starting, what's it called? Like a society that way.
Okay. What other Lockean type mechanisms exist in this writing that were there? Did you guys see anything about property?
Oh, yeah.
What'd you see, Lucas?
Well, I mean, honestly, he talks a lot about, his wife and his family, and, like Locke would say that that's considered, like a person's, like a man's property
Okay.
of sense, and also he talks about, like, his farm, and so kind of like this family is rooted in this physical space, and so, he definitely, just like Locke says, a lot of conflict arises whenever, external threats try to come into this space of, this is mine, this is my property.
Okay. How did Locke say we develop property?
We work for it.
We work for it, right? It's through labor, through our own labors. So when Corbusier says this about his father, this formerly rude soil has been converted by my father's own hands into a pleasant farm, and it has returned and established in all of our rights. It is founded on our rank, our freedom, our power as citizens, our importance as inhabitants of such a district. We're seeing how those ideas of individual rights and social contract are coming back through, the individualism, that liberalist thought coming back through, echoing in his own domain. Did you see any other interesting tie-ins? Nathan, how about you?
I mean, I think it's more of a general theme than as much like specific things I saw.
Okay.
But I do think just the general idea of like what you have a right to, what's yours, is really important here. Especially how much he talks about specifically his situation, his experiences. Like he's trying to appeal to a general mindset, but at the same time there's a very personal feeling to it.
Right.
Which I think is kind of important to the idea of property and in general what people have a right to.
Right. I think in some ways he's trying to appeal to people in the same way that a salesman would, right? He's trying to sell people, Europeans, on the idea of America, that this is what it is. But he's doing it in a very interesting way. He's selling it by underselling it. He's not coming out and cudgeling people, right? Look at his allegory of the bees. Did anybody pick up on the bee allegory, Emma?
I thought that was really interesting because earlier in the third paragraph he says that I suppose when you were here you used some of your fine styles to nominate me the farmer of feelings And how much more refined on the contrary those with the European whose mind is improved by education and significance and by their acquired advantage. And he goes into this really detailed description of how he collects bees and honey and what he does to like trick them into coming with him and all this stuff. And that's in itself a kind of intelligence that the Europeans would never have.
Okay. Okay. From a very pragmatic. Does anybody else see anything in that?
With the bees. So he says, what is it? I seldom thwart their inclinations. It is in freedom that they work. Where I to confine them, they would dwindle away and quit their labor. So I think that's kind of how he's saying that the Americans feel with the British Empire kind of looming over them and confining them. And he thinks maybe they could thrive more if they were on their own and left to their own devices. Which is kind of like with the Stamp Act and all those, it's like regulating how America can trade and get goods. And I think he says it's counterproductive if they want America to grow.
Okay. Do you see anywhere in there some sort of connective tissue between the idea of bees and the idea of a society? I mean, he talks about bees as being busy, as being industrious, as being easily governed and happy as long as they had work. Even in our own country, long after this, you'll see the idea of bees come back across in the late 18th century. As the Mormons kind of moved across the plains, they took on, you'll see a lot of, in the religious texts there, even some of the iconography of Utah. The flag of Utah has a bee hive on it, with bees flying around it. You'll see a lot of these things, ideas come back as positivist structures, right? When we're creating an idea of a society, he's creating one that is full of industry, full of family, and is wide open, right? Which in a lot of ways really describes America. I mean, think again, he's writing in the 1770s here. Most of America is still an unknown continent. As far as they know, it just exceeds ad nauseum, right? So it's kind of interesting when you start to look at how he's pulling apart these things that feel like just non sequiturs, that are really deep meanings about the way he's trying to convince you that America is. Do you think that's really the way America was? Do you think it was full of just industrious, busy bee people who were working on their farms? What do you say to create create machinery? Where I can't remember where we had it here, but to create machinery for his wife to ease her works and increase her pleasures of leisure and those sort of things? Or do you think it was more monochromatic than that?
Yeah, I don't think it was like as like noble or whatever as he makes it seem. I mean, it's definitely. I mean, especially around that time, I'm sure like almost no matter where you went, like it was a hard life comparatively to us. But people went to, they came to America, especially kind of like in that time period, not necessarily to like escape religious persecution anymore, but it was because of the opportunities that were in America, that there was just ample land to take. And so, it's almost like, people came to America to get a part of the good life, not to like work hard, but because life would be easier here than whatever home country they came from, because there was just more resources to just use. And he kind of like, I don't know if he talked about it in this letter or like a later one, but he was talking about like all these people that come here, they just feast or whatever.
Right, yeah.
Because we have ample just stuff, food. Like, if you put in, I guess, a little bit of work, you can have the bounty of the harvest all for yourself type thing.
So has anybody read Thomas More? Utopia?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah? So Utopia is both an ideal place and no place?
Right.
You kind of get those same kind of feelings from what he's describing. I mean, everything he's describing about America is that it's everything you ever hoped for and more, yet is so veiled in kind of very vague kind of language that you would never be certain of what you were actually going to see when you got there. So it's kind of interesting as he's going through and he's talking about the idea of his country, and it's so the very last paragraph here in letter 2 really evokes some emotion. Kaylee, could you read that last paragraph for us?
Beginning with I never should.
Correct.
I never should have done, were I to recount the many objects which involuntarily strike my imagination in the midst of my work, and spontaneously afford me the most amusing relief. These appear insignificant trifles to a person who has traveled through Europe and America and is acquainted with books and with moving sciences, but such simple objects of contemplation suffice me, who have no time to bestow on more extensive observations. Happily, these require no study; they are obvious. They gild the moments I dedicate to them, and enliven the severe labors which I perform. At home, my happiness springs from the very different objects. The gradual unfolding of my children's reason, the study of their dawning tempers attract all my paternal attention. I have to contrive little punishments for their little faults, small encouragements for their good actions, and a variety of other expedients dictated by various occasions. But these are themes unworthy your perusal, and which ought not to be carried beyond the walls of my house, being domestic mysteries adapted only to the locality of the small sanctuary wherein my family resides. Sometimes I delight in inventing and executing machines which simplify my life's labor. I have been tolerably successful that way, and these, sir, are the narrow circles within which I constantly revolve, and what can I wish for beyond them? I bless God for all the good He has given me. I envy no man's prosperity, and with no other portion of happiness than that I may live to teach the same philosophy to my children, and give each of them a farm, show them how to cultivate it, and be like their father, good, substantial, independent American farmers, an appellation which will be the most fortunate one a man of my class can possess, so long as our civil government continues to shed blessings on our household. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So remember how we talked last time about Dickinson as a politician selling himself? Do you see some of that same material coming across here? Go ahead, Lucas.
Yeah, so just real quick, I don't know if anybody's ever watched Rick and Morty, yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, there's an episode where basically it's this like space station, I think it's like the Rick episode, or it's like the city of the Ricks or whatever. Well, yeah, so anyway, in this episode, there's this factory where a bunch of people are employed in like this just dismal working conditions to produce like this candy for other people to eat, right? And so one day, one of the workers revolts against like the system. He like murders a bunch of like the foremen and the bosses and stuff, and then just as he like, you know, gets a guy and he's like has a gun in his head and he's like, I want like a shuttle to get me out of here and like money to go off and like run on my own. And then the second that they give him that and they're like, yes, you've fought for your ability to escape from the system and win yourself this happy life, they basically like capture him and like put this like machine on his head so that that happiness will then be like taken out of him and put into the candy, and it's called Simple Rick. And so then that candy, then people buy and eat it so that they can get that feeling of the simple life, you know, the good life type thing. And so he's just being milked for his just like the simple life or whatever. And so reading that paragraph was literally like that, where he's trying to sell you, like, oh, it's a simple life. You'll have a wife, 2.5 kids, and plot of land, white picket fence. But at the end of the day, like, as we all know in reality, like, you know, that's not how people's lives necessarily always work out.
Right, but he leaves a clause in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can have this great life. It's all yours for the taking if. What was the if? What was the clause there at the very end?
Our civil government continues to shed blessings on us.
Exactly. So he's making an appeal. He's trying to appeal to Europeans. Hey man, like, we've got a good thing going on here. If you guys come over and screw this up, like, you'll have screwed up this whole great universe. This whole great thing will be evaporated because you wanted more simple Rick.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just that same idea,
Yeah.
right? But he's politicking at this point. He's trying to get, and remember, he's writing this from a prison cell, right? He's trying to get people to buy into this idea that, hey, we're good people. I got nothing against you guys. You know, I'm just happenstance being here. I had some problems getting through, But I'm just a simple, ordinary guy. But his writing is really, really complicated, right? The message he's trying to get across, although on the surface level being very easy, is very, very complicated. It's full of ideas inside of that text. It's almost like little brain bombs or something to get inside people's heads, get their defenses down, and then bring about these very complicated ideas about independence, rights, and liberties that aren't safe to talk about outside of the halls of Parliament, right? As we discussed last time, that anywhere outside of that, you're questioning the acts of Parliament. Well, he's figured out a way to be subversive without overtly being subversive, and that's a pretty interesting ploy from a man in jail. You know. Okay. So as we move on to letter 3, what is an American? This is pretty much getting to the heart of the matter of what he is trying to convey, right? So he's gotten his political ideology out there. He's got the white picket fence and the nuclear family there. In letter 3, he's trying to describe to this theoretical European what he would find when he arrived on the shores of America. What did you find that was kind of bizarre about his descriptors of America? Did anybody find anything that just stood out as kind of an eyebrow-raising description?
He mentions in here that, like, just like the different religions living in total harmony.
Right.
Which I thought was a bit odd.
Okay.
Just given the history of, like, there being a lot of, like I'm right, you're wrong, and all that. It just seemed weird that, like, he would idealize that.
Right.
When it's not exactly the case.
Right. Again, he's trying to play off the idea that Europe has a long history of religious warfare. 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, all these, oh my gosh, how many revolutions did we go through in England alone that were entirely based off the premise of being Catholic or Protestant? Everything from Henry VIII forward seemed like every new monarchy was going to bring about a change. So when he's talking about this, he's again trying to show that America is the land of utopia. Again, that idea. But he's tied that again, that religion, to labor. Right? He's playing out that we're too busy to have any of this religious strife. We're going through things and we're raising kids without these sort of contrivances because we don't have a nobility, we don't have either civil or religious nobility. They don't exist in America. So everybody here that you would find is just a plain humble person, right? He's trying to do a little bit, it's kind of unfair, but he's kind of self-effacing in the way he's approaching these things. He continues to laud the European as an enlightened, well-read, and lectured soul, and himself as just this humble country farmer who's here, who doesn't have a great deal of skills or anything, but yet he's painting some very interesting categories here. What about when he's describing the land itself? Does that catch anybody's eye? The seaside or the woods? What about those were interesting there, Jack?
Just that, like, people's, like, from what I got, that, like, people are sort of confined to their, like, areas.
Okay.
Like, in those who live near the sea feed more on fish than on flesh. Like, I don't know. It seemed like a weird way of sort of describing that.
Okay. All right. I like it. I think it's kind of interesting the way that he describes those that live by the sea as raucous and full of fight. So when he's talking about those things, think about America at the time. Where were most urban developments in America?
On the ocean.
On the ocean, right? So playing that against what he describes in the Woodsman, right, where they're as the Indians as they grow their crops and deal with the nature of the land and things. Wouldn't that describe the majority of the people in America, not living in a city. So it's kind of interesting the way even he's slighting those centers of American culture, but yet he's going through and talking about where next wish of this traveler will be to know where all these people came. They're a mixture of English, Scots, Irish, French, Dutch, Germans, and Swedes. From this promiscuous breed, the race now called Americans has risen. It's interesting in that he's saying that we are Europe in a larger microcosm, but at the same time, we are not any of those things. He goes on and discusses how grateful he is not to be of certain Eastern European descent, not a Pole or a Hungarian, which is kind of interesting, right? So at this point, the Poles and Hungarians are part of what empire?
The Russian?
No, they're not Russian.
So Prussian probably would have been closer to Poland, but would Hungary also have been Prussian, or would it have been more Austrian?
It would have been Austro-Hungarian, right? So you're looking here at enemies, historic enemies of the British Crown. So he's again trying to show out like, hey, we're all these people that we're made up of, you're friends with, and all those people that we're so fortunate not to be, are those are your enemies. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, kind of thing. Again, he's trying to paint pictures of why America and Britain should be friends in this whole thing, and that they should leave the Americans alone to do what they're doing. Do you find the continual references to plants, the personification of nature, interesting? Elise, can you draw any corollaries between plants and humanity?
Well, he basically, like, as you read it, he makes it seem like the Europeans and the Americans themselves are the plants, and that, the Americans are the ones that are great and they're producing all these good foods, and then the the Europeans are just useless, and they're withered and they don't deserve. But if they come over, they'll have better soil and they'll flower like everyone else.
Okay. Does anybody else see some odd turns of phrasing there between plants and people? He's got here. Men are like plants. The goodness and flavor of the fruit proceeds from the peculiar soil and the exposition to which they grow. We are nothing but what we derive from the air we breathe, the climate we inhabit, the government we obey, the system of a religion we profess, and the nature of our employment. Here you will find but few of these crimes. Which crimes is he in reference to? Because he just mentioned two institutions and then came to crimes, right? He mentioned government and religion, and then crimes.
Oh, the union of government and religion.
Which was very, right, that's the Anglican Church is the personification of both of those entities in one. But it's interesting that he denotes those as crimes. Not as injustices or as things that we must go over with, but he's calling them out and out that what your actions are, the actions of this church and the actions of this state are out and out criminal. So I'm wondering if you see any connection between his imprisonment and the idea of the church and state as criminal actors. No? Okay. All right. Do you see anything interesting in the way that he describes the native Indians? Towards the end of that Jack, go
It's
ahead.
not very nice to them.
He's not. He's not very nice at all.
Their tender minds have nothing else to contemplate but the example of their parents. Like them, they grow up a mongrel breed, half civilized, half savage. It's just not nice words.
So what do you think he's trying to say about the Indians in America?
Almost that the Indians are just like the land of nature, like it's almost just like something that needs to be like conquered and replaced. You know, it's just like another thing that, you know, like another thing that imposes itself on like the American lifestyle to where, you know, it's, you know, something you have to kind of like be hardy against, you know, just like you have to be hardy against nature and like work hard and toil. You also have to toil and I guess be back against those Native Americans.
Do you think he would have thought the same thing about Native Americans after his return to America that he's thought here? That they were simple, that they were tender and just of the earth. Do you think he would have thought the same? What's that?
After he found out that they killed.
After he found out that yeah, his wife and children were slaughtered in an Indian massacre. Probably thought something differently of them, right? At that point, he probably was beginning to envision the Indians probably more as warriors or a martial force to which he was trying to now defend himself from. Here, he's looking at them as if they're almost inconsequential. They're a harmless kind of distraction from what's going on. He talks about them in their wigwams and smoking tobacco and all these things that again kind of draw corollaries back to his sitting by the hearth watching his wife suckle a babe and all this that sort of thing. He's kind of drawing a corollary there, but at the same time he's showing that the natives are below the white-skinned settlers, right?
I feel like he's saying that because he doesn't want the Europeans to think, well, these are the real Americans, like that's who, and we don't want to live like them, we want to live like us. And so he's saying like, no, we're separate. They're not the Americans that we're talking about.
That very good. Yeah. So I mean, he's pulling again the complexities of his argument coming across here. That he's trying to show that we aren't them. We're better than they are, but you know, we still have a whole lot going on for us, right? Talks about the scale of America and how a European coming off the boat would have to alter the scale of the way that they thought. And he directly says that 200 miles formerly appeared to very great distances, now but a trifle. He no sooner breathes our air than he forms schemes, embarks in designs in which he never would have thought of in his own country. There are a plenitude of society, confines of many useful ideas, and often extinguishes the most laudable schemes from here ripen into maturity. Thus the European becomes an American. Again, he's going back to that idea of plenty and of great things, but he's also drawing the fact that, hey, we've got way more than enough for everything. Everything that can happen here, everything that can happen in a mind, suddenly comes to you as you walk off that boat. I kind of doubt that the experience was that transformative as soon as you stepped off the boat in New York, but maybe it was. Let's talk for a second about the people that came across on these ships. What primarily was bringing them to the States?
Maybe they couldn't find success in whatever country they started, like their home, their origin, and they were just like, well, might as well try over there, because like someone said earlier, there's a lot of resources, it was easy to just grab them up because no one's claimed them yet.
Okay.
So if they wanted a fresh start.
What do you think, what kind of commonalities, if we had to describe that person, right, without using gender or national identity, what kind of things do you think we could describe about that person that came over to the States?
A loser.
A loser, okay. Michael, what do you think?
I was gonna say poor, but
Poor, okay. Kylie? You could have rich losers too.
yeah.
Kylie, what do you think?
I have no idea.
No idea. Okay. Elise, what do you think?
Hopeful.
Hopeful. Emma?
Maybe they've been embarrassed in some way and they want to surrender.
Okay. All right. Nathan?
For the settlers?
Yeah.
I I guess uncertain, I think. I mean, maybe a bit about the future, but especially about the past. I mean, something probably happened in some way for them to think that this could be a better way to go.
Okay.
Yeah, like opportunistic.
Opportunistic,
Yeah.
okay. Jack, what do you think?
Probably hopeful.
Hopeful, okay. Mallory?
Bold.
Bold, all right. Jessica?
I have some sense of freedom seeking and like escape from whatever oppression they were coming from.
Okay. I think you're all correct in this. Frederick Jackson Turner, about a century after this was written, would come up with a theory called American exceptionalism, that the frontiers of America drew out and created a breed of people who were risk takers, who were willing to be inventive and to deal with suffering, but were always going to be inventive and high-spirited, right? And he made this theory call across that American exceptionalism really is where the birth of that came from, is that we were the high breed, because as you bred peoples together that had these sort of traits, right? You just exacerbate those traits in the newer generation, so that you're only leaving behind in Europe the loafs and the louts, the people who are too dumb to move away are the ones that you're leaving behind. So we kind of see some of the foundations of some of those initial kind of thoughts here in Corsair's writing. The last one I wanted to talk to you all about was letter 12. And there's a significant departure from the sort of lighter tones in the first two letters. This one, although it's entitled Distresses of a Frontier Man, sounds like almost an entirely different person. There's a very long passage here that I want to read to you. So, could not the great nation we belong to have accomplished her designs by means of her numerous armies, by means of those fleets which cover the ocean? Must those who are masters of 2/3 of the trade world, who have in their hands the power which almighty gold can give, who possesses a species of wealth that increases their desires, must they establish their conquest with our insignificant, innocent blood? It seems like he's taken a significant departure away from trying to sell this to cudgeling people with his kind of idea that the British are now actually criminals, that they're our innocent blood. Do you think that he has built a foundation in the first two passages that we read to be able to come across as a salesman, as he's moving into that hard sell, right? That he can build this argument this way, or do you think this is hurting his argument?
But in the first letters, wasn't he really kind of saying like we should be friends? You should come over here and we'll like welcome you. And now he's saying you guys are criminals.
Right.
So that undermines his argument.
Okay.
I would say.
Okay.
I would say.
All right. No. Michael, what do you think? You don't know? I mean, so if he's on TV trying to, or if he's in front of you trying to sell a car, and the first hour of his diatribe is, "Hey man, this is the greatest car in the world. It's so great. Look, just come over here." And then he comes up with, "Look here, man. Either you buy the car, or get lost." I mean, that's kind of where we're at.
It's very aggressive.
It is. It's a
strategy. For
Yeah.
selling a car, or for selling a piece of land. But if he's trying to sell it to, it sounds like a challenge in that way.
Okay.
If you put it that way. So I guess if he's trying to persuade, I don't know what he's trying to do, persuade a European to come over or to see America in a certain way, but I would not feel, I would feel ostracized.
Okay. Lucas, what do you think?
So I'm forgetting his name. He wrote the that one like pamphlet like in like the winter of
Thomas Paine?
Yeah, Thomas Paine. He also
Common sense.
Yeah, common sense. Yeah, he also wrote another thing that was some along the lines of like people aren't bad or evil ever, and it's only like the institutions and like our forms of organization that do the evil in the world. And so I think that whenever he's getting to this part of his argument, he's not calling necessarily the British as bad, but more of, like what the British have created. Just kind of like their institutions and the way that they organize themselves. And so, it is a hard sell, but it's almost like him calling out the British for, like doing stupid things, and he's saying like, we have the correct way of doing things. But it's not like, oh, you're bad for being bad. It's like you're bad for what you're doing. But it's not like as much of a personal attack then.
Okay, Kaylee, what do you have?
Well, he's like it sounds like he's trying to convince them to like, you don't want to be part of this, like, this evil state. And over here, you're separated from them, you're no longer part of that, you're part of this.
Okay. Jack?
It's, I guess, like, in a way he could be saying the reward is just too great not to.
Okay.
And that, like, even though there are these troubles that, like, come with it. Is that what he's saying?
Well, I mean, it's a good question as to what he's saying. It's about how we interpret what it is he's saying, right? Mallory, you have something?
Same thing as Kaylee.
Okay. So, do you think that perhaps early on he's built the argument that America and Britain are two different places, they're two different races, and that Britain ought not to cause problems with the Americans? Do you think that's more of where he's going with this, or do you think it's a different sort of argument? Emma, what do you have?
I think it's kind of like a stereotype. Like they're doing this to us, they could try to do it to you.
It's very, I mean, these are all very real things, but this is again, it's about building identity, right? So as he's gone across and built this identity of America, in that is that challenge, right? Again, if he's distresses of a frontierman, he's in here. There's a lot about the land and nature and these sort of things as trials and tribulations. At the same time, he's calling out the British people as a challenge. He's painted a picture of America as a very challenging place, but one that is willing to fight for its right to be challenging. So we have a lot of interesting ideas with how we perceive what America will become. He's writing this obviously as America's fighting for its freedom, but he's also kind of coming across as an idealist. So, for next Tuesday, I realize it's voting day. We'll be reading the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, so we'll have some discussions about the pros and cons of the Constitutional Convention and that idea between federalism and states' rights. So hopefully you all have a very good weekend and enjoy.